This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
Back in 1953, at MIT, two young mathematicians crossed paths. Professor Yisrael Aumann was a young, brilliant doctoral student when he met John Nash, the founder of game theory and the subject of the biography and Oscar-winning film A Beautiful Mind. Nash shared his ideas on game theory with Aumann, who later said, quote, "I didn't give the field much thought at the time because I was busy with pure mathematics." Years later, when Aumann was hired by Bell to work on anti-aircraft missiles, he realized that Nash's ideas were a game changer, pun intended. Later, both men would receive Nobel Prizes for their contributions to the field of economics. Recently, Aumann expressed criticism about assertions by prominent behavioral economists such as Daniel Kahneman and Ariely that humans are fundamentally irrational. Aumann urges a return to rationality. Professor Yisrael Aumann is himself a legend of game theory. He's a founding member of the Stony Brook Center for Game Theory and is a professor at the Center for the Study of Rationality at the Hebrew University. We're thrilled to be joined today on the show for the second time by Professor Yisrael Aumann. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
Well, good morning. I'm glad to be here. Let me start out by making a correction.
Yes.
Okay. John Nash is not the founder of game theory. Okay. The founder of game theory, there are two founders actually. One is John von Neumann, who was, I would say, probably among three or four of the most outstanding mathematicians of the 20th century. And the other one was Oscar Morgenstern, who was an economist, okay? And together, von Neumann was Jewish, and he escaped from Europe to the United States in the 30s, made his way to Princeton. Morgenstern was not Jewish; he was Austrian, and he himself liked to say that he was a descendant of a bastard son of the Austrian emperor. And so he was sort of Austrian aristocracy. And in spite of the fact that he was not Jewish, he was in no danger in staying in Austria. He despised Hitler and also ran away to the United States. And they met at a cocktail party in Princeton in the late 30s. And Morgenstern had some of the founding ideas of game theory, and so did von Neumann. Von Neumann had published an important paper in 1928, perhaps the first substantial paper in game theory, and they exchanged ideas, and they got together, and they made a partnership, and they wrote a monumental book called The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior, which was published in 1944. So they are the parents of game theory. And Nash, game theory became an important item at Princeton in the late 40s and early 50s, and Nash was part of that endeavor. He latched onto it, and he made a very important definition of equilibrium points, in games, which was a generalization of what von Neumann had done in 28 and connected onto the book that had been written. But von Neumann and Morgenstern are definitely the founding fathers of game theory, and Nash is one of game theory's greats. But he's not the founding father. Okay. So let me make that correction. And with that, we can
get to business.
We can start. Okay. Okay. So
I'm
that's
glad
quite right. Yes.
I'm glad we made the mistake.
Yes.
'Cause otherwise, we wouldn't have been honored with the story.
Von Neumann, by the way, in addition to game theory, which is perhaps which is an important discovery, he also made another important discovery, and that is the electronic computer. Okay. So the basis of modern computers was devised by von Neumann. Basically, the idea is a stored address, but okay, we won't go into that.
So what do you have against the notion that we people, the average Joe for that matter, are irrational when we come to make day-to-day decisions? Why do you oppose that idea so profoundly?
Well, the behavioral economists, Kahneman and Tversky and company, they say that people do not figure things out rationally, but rather they go by rules of thumb, which every situation has a rule of thumb. Not every situation, but many situations have rules of thumb associated with them, and they operate by those rules of thumb. They call them heuristics or biases, okay? And they point to situations in which those heuristics and biases lead to suboptimal results, irrational results. Now, I agree that people do not think things through. They do go by heuristics and biases, okay? But my contention is that these heuristics and biases usually lead to good solutions, to rational behavior. Okay, the behavior is rational. The reason for the behavior is not rational. Okay, now why is the behavior rational when people have not thought things through? And the reason for that is that these heuristics and biases, these rules of thumb, did not spring from nowhere. They evolved. They developed. They evolved. They evolved either biologically. For example, one rule of thumb is eat when you're hungry. Okay.
Preferably pizza.
Or eat tasty food. Okay. So that hunger evolved. Mr. Darwin made it happen. Yes, okay. It evolved, and evolution works by survival of the fittest. Things that evolve, features that evolve, including behavioral features, yes, they survive because they are good, because they are fit. Yeah. In other words, now it's what would a behavioral economist do with food? Okay, with eating when you're hungry or eating tasty food. Well, he would say, look, people eat, obese people eat when they're hungry or when they see tasty food, and it's not good for them. Okay, or they would say people coming out of concentration camps who have not eaten properly for months or years, yes, and their stomachs have shrunk, they eat, okay, and then their stomachs burst and they die, okay. Now, so Kahneman and Tversky would say, this is irrational behavior. Eating when you're hungry is irrational, okay? They point to situations like that where really it is irrational. It's irrational for obese people to eat. But these rules evolved not for the exception, for the obese people, okay? And obesity is quite prevalent nowadays, but in evolutionary time, it's only in the last 100 or 200 years that it has become prevalent. Obesity did not used to be prevalent, although we see sometimes in China on those temples in China, we see rich people who are very obese sitting there. So obesity is not something entirely modern, but it was much less prevalent. Eating when you're hungry is good for you, okay? And eating tasty food is good for you, in general, not in the exceptional cases. Now, I've studied 26 different heuristics and biases of behavioral economics, and I have found that the examples that they use to show that the behavior following the heuristics and biases is irrational, all those behaviors are in exceptional situations, in fact, in contrived situations, okay? And for example, let me give you an example, okay? The most famous example of Kahneman and Tversky is Linda. Have you heard of Linda? No. Okay. So Linda is a young woman, unmarried. She's close to 30, in her late 20s. In college, she studied philosophy, and she was involved in all kinds of social woke, nowadays they would call it woke projects. This research was done in the 70s, so woke didn't exist yet, but it exists now. And social justice, and she demonstrated against against the storing of atomic weapons by the United States and so on. This happened in the United States, says Linda. Okay, now I ask you, or the respondents in this survey were asked, is it more likely that Linda is a clerk in a bank or a feminist clerk in a bank? What's more likely? What do you think?
A feminist clerk in a bank.
Feminist.
Yes,
right.
Of course.
Okay, right. So 72% of the respondents said the same thing that Naor said, okay?
And the other 28 lied, probably.
The
lied
28 said, no, it's more likely that she's a bank clerk. Well, they were right, the 28%. The 28% are right, because if you are a feminist bank clerk, then you are in particular a bank clerk, okay? So it's more likely that she is a bank clerk. It's simple logic, okay?
Uh-huh.
Now,
what were they trying to prove in this?
So they were trying to prove that people are irrational, okay? That that people don't respond irrationally, because
But that's-
obviously if
it's
you're a feminist bank clerk, then you're also a bank clerk. And you might be a bank clerk without being a feminist bank clerk, even if you have a history like Linda has. Okay?
It's a misleading question.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's a trap. It's a trap. And I corresponded with Dick Taylor, who got the Nobel Prize in economics in 2017. And he is the second person to get the Nobel Prize in economics for his work in behavioral economics, okay? All the others, yes, in all the intervening years, is not for their work in behavioral economics, but for their work in mainstream economics, okay? Now, I corresponded with Dick Taylor, okay? And I had a long correspondence with him, and he admitted that this is a trap question. He used that word, a trap. And he said people are irrational. We call them irrational because they have to be on the lookout for traps, okay? That's what he said. But no, I don't buy that. I think very few people will buy that. If you are asked a question, you know, you're a college student and you're asked a question on campus for some kind of survey for a
lollipop.
You don't have to be on the lookout for traps. You do the first thing that you think. You know, at the time, I wrote my thesis up in a paper which I published in 2019 in Nature, Human Behavior, in the periodical Nature, Human Behavior. It's an offshoot of Nature, and there I discussed also at the time I was writing this, I was writing up this criticism of the Linda experiment, well, not experiment, survey, yes. My grandson, in fact, my great-grandson, who you saw sitting here, okay, when you came in, I was just finishing a study session with him, okay?
Yes.
Now he's 19, he's going on 20, okay? But at the time that I was writing this up, he was maybe 12 years old or 10 years old or something like that. And he said to me, "Grandpa, why did Napoleon wear suspenders?" Okay? And at the time I was writing this section, okay? And I thought and thought and thought and thought, and then I finally said, "Okay, Alad, I give up. Why did Napoleon wear suspenders?" So he said, "Grandpa, or great-grandpa, it's to hold up his pants." Okay? Now, so I got this wrong because I fell into the same trap that Tversky and Kahneman laid for the Linda respondents, which is I assumed that what they were telling me is relevant. So they told this whole long rigmarole about
Linda's
what
background.
kind of person Linda is, yes, progressive, woke, and the respondents naturally thought that this was relevant. So when Elad asked me, why did Napoleon wear suspenders, yes, I assumed that Napoleon had something to do with it, yes?
Yeah.
I assumed subconsciously.
Yeah.
And I was looking for a connection between Napoleon and suspenders, okay?
He was
Which
very
is one of
short.
there's a famous, I think, sociologist, or he's a linguist, Paul Grice, which says there's four principles of exchange,
Yes.
between people, and one of them is the principle of relevancy.
Yes.
That when you're engaging in conversation with someone, you assume four different things
Yeah.
about what's being told, and one of them is that the person the thing that they're telling you is relevant.
Yeah,
To which I think is another kind of bias which we evolved into. It makes sense.
Exactly, it makes sense, and 99 point. Now the Linda survey is obviously contrived. Yes, it doesn't appear it doesn't occur, just like you said. People assume rightly that what they're being told is relevant. Okay.
But
It has to be said. The way the question is phrased, it sounds like you're asking, is Linda a feminist or is she not a feminist? That's basically what the question sounds like. And
that's
you say,
what it sounds like.
She's a feminist.
if you would ask what odds are that she is X and Y, then you might, but that's not how they form the question.
No, even not odds. Yes, in other words, it's. I think the odds are 100% in favor of her being a
banker.
A banker,
Yes.
a bank clerk. Yes, right.
Yes.
That's so. But it's a trick question.
Yeah.
It's not only a trick; it's a trap question. It's purposely trapped, and Dick Taylor wrote this to me. Yes, I have it on my email.
But if I read between the lines, you're a gentleman and a scholar and a professor, but you come with very harsh, you blame them for cherry picking, for, I don't know how you would call it, but it's a very harsh accusation in the academic world. What was their blind spot? Like, it sounds like they did it intentionally. How would you explain it? What's the rationale? What's the rationale behind their?
I really. What should I tell you? You're asking me to explain. First of all, I think they did important work. They did important work. Tversky and Kahneman and the other behavioral economists do important work because they point out that people do not behave. They do not think things through, especially when you have to make a quick decision. Danny Kahneman wrote a book called Thinking Slow and Fast. I think it's Thinking Slow, Thinking Fast, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, or something like that. Yes, and on fast thinking, that's where the irrationalities come in. Now, if you were given a day to think over the Linda example, then obviously you would say that it is more likely that she's a bank clerk than that she's a feminist bank clerk. So on fast thinking, you do have to it is interesting that people work according to
instincts,
to rules of thumb, biases and heuristics. Okay, and these biases and heuristics are important, but they are important not because they sometimes, very, very rarely, in contrived situations, lead to mistakes, but because they usually are right, okay? Usually they're right. Now, you see, if you open a restaurant, yes, you better open a restaurant that serves tasty food and not wholesome food, okay? If you're going to serve wholesome food, which is not tasty, you'll close your doors very quickly. So you are responding to that rule of thumb, or you might call it heuristic: eat tasty food. Okay?
Unless it's a woke city.
So it's important, and in advertising, it's very important in advertising to take into account people's biases and heuristics, okay? Or in sales, in supermarkets, they put next to the cash register things that they want people to buy, okay? So people look at them. But still, even if it's next to a cash register, if you don't want it, you're not going to buy it, okay? Yes? So it's to call attention to things that people may want, so you put them next to the cash register, okay? Mm-hmm. So you call attention to them, and your eye falls on them, okay? So other things like that. It's important. Behavioral economics is very, very important because of the positive side, not because of the negative side. Okay, the negative side is unusual. Okay, the positive side is important.
I think there's also some rationality to thinking fast. I mean, if you spent a day on every decision you had to make,
if you see a tiger,
you wouldn't get anywhere in life, or you might end up spending a very, very expensive time on making a simple decision. So there's some rationality to it, but I wonder, like, I think sometimes also the exception proves the rule. Sometimes the fact that you can find certain exceptions comes to actually strengthen the rule to begin with, and the fact that it is a useful tool. But maybe we'll move on from
just one more question, because what I deduce is that because you talk a lot about evolution in your interviews, in your lectures, so actually can you say that the entire basis of game theory stands on the pillars of evolution?
Yes, absolutely. Well, no. I was too fast. I do subscribe to Danny Kahneman's thinking fast, thinking slow idea. And I think a lot of game theory is about thinking slow, okay? A lot of game theory is about thinking slow. So, even most of it, okay? And in thinking slow, nobody says that people make the mistakes that could be made in behavioral economics. By the way, even Tversky and Kahneman themselves, in their original book, in their original paper in Science in 1974, wrote that these heuristics are generally useful, but sometimes they lead to systematic errors, okay? And they chose, even after writing that at the very beginning of the history of behavioral economics, they chose to emphasize the sometimes and not the in general, okay? So they themselves are aware of the fact that the heuristics are in general useful. They even use the term useful. And they repeated this again in publication in Psychological Review 20 years later, or 18 years later in 92. So they are aware of this, that the heuristics are usually useful. And yes, that's right, they developed because of evolution. Now, evolution does not have to be biological, like hunger. Hunger is biological evolution. It's the genes, okay? The genes for hunger developed because of biological fitness, the Darwinian type, okay? But evolution could be cultural evolution, which just means learning, okay? What do I mean by learning? Learning, I don't mean studying in a book and then taking an exam. I mean learning by experience, okay? By experience, you learn that that when you're told something, especially a long rigmarole like in Linda, it's usually irrelevant. Okay, and all kinds of things. All the. Let me give you another example. Okay. The difference between certainty and near certainty. Okay. Now, there's a tremendous difference. There's a discontinuity, a jump between how people respond when something is certain and when you tell them it's 99.9% or 99% that it's this way. Okay, that something will happen with probability 99%, and that doesn't make sense, because with probability 99%, it's so close to certainty that it shouldn't make any difference in most cases. But people don't respond to the actual mathematical probability. Okay, when I invite somebody for dinner, okay, I'm making a dinner for a small group of people, and I invite somebody, and she says 99% I'll come. Now, what that means is
I won't come.
No, not I won't come. I want, no, if she knows that she won't come, she'll say so. Okay, she says, I'm not sure I can make it, but I want in. I want you to hold the place for me, okay? I want in, but I'm not sure I can make it. That's what she means, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So you get used to that. You get used to hearing 99%, and it's not really 99%, okay? So you get used to that, and people respond to that because it's the usual thing. The usual thing is that 99% is just says
maybe,
mm-hmm. Okay? Or when a contractor says to you, 99% your house will be ready in 8 months, yes, you better figure at least a year, okay, or a year and a half. Yes, the word 99%, Tversky and Kahneman took it literally, that it means 99%, but it doesn't mean that. Okay, in everyday language, it doesn't mean that. Okay. So, lots of examples like that. Okay.
So they had biases themselves. They had biases themselves. Like all of us do. No comment.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Let's get back to your studies of game theory. What can the average Joe listening to us, what can he deduce from your areas of expertise to his day-to-day life? Like, how can I implement games theory into my life and make choices better, if it's relevant at all?
Well, game theory is most successful when you're talking about a situation which has some regularity to it.
Mm-hmm. Do you?
For example, in 2012, Lloyd Shapley and Al Roth got the Nobel Prize in Game Theory in economics. Now, there's no Nobel Prize in Game Theory, but game theory is considered part of economics, although that's not necessarily the game theory is wider than economics. One might consider economics part of game theory, okay? But they got the prize for their work in market design, okay? Now, what is market design? Market design is, the best example is the market for men among women and the market for women among men, okay? In other words, what one calls in English shidduchim, okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Tinder.
Yes. Now, so the situation is that that you have a number of men and a number of women, and each man has a preference order on the women, and each woman has a preference order on the men, and then you have to decide how to make a matching of men to women. And this matching has to have the property that there is no couple, okay, no couple consisting of a man and a woman who are not matched to each other and would have preferred their each other to the partners with whom they are matched, okay? And that's a non-trivial exercise, okay? To devise a way of doing that is a non-trivial exercise. Now, I don't think that matchmakers would use the Shapley, it's not the Shapley-Roth, the algorithm was devised by Shapley, and Roth became famous for making use of it in many situations. Now, those situations in which he made use of it, they are not they are not marriage markets, because people, at least in the West, don't get married that way, okay? But they are used, for example, in assigning school children to schools, okay? Or in designing, in assigning medical students to hospitals for interning or things like that. Okay, and this is the algorithm, which was designed by Shapley in cooperation with David Gale, who died before 2012. He died, I think, he died sometime in the between, I think, 2008 or something like that. So he didn't get the Nobel Prize, because you don't get the Nobel Prize if you're dead. There's one exception to that, by the way, which I'll mention right away. So the Shapley, for his work in devising the algorithm, and Roth for his work in applying the algorithm, they got the Shapley Prize, and that's what game theory is
practical,
is really good for. Now, my own. You asked about my own work in game theory. Well, what the committee most emphasized in my work is the repeated games aspect, okay? Repeated games, and to say it non-technically, in a repeated situation, I showed that it is much more likely that people cooperate with each other when you have a situation that occurs again and again than when you have a one-time encounter.
Why?
What's that?
Why?
Well, why is that? Okay. And well, that's what I asked myself. And that insight, you know, when you tell people about it, they say, "Okay, that's obvious." Yes, okay. When you go to your neighborhood grocery store, okay, you are likely to trust him that he will not give you bad merchandise that has gone bad. Yes. Whereas if somebody comes to your door and wants to sell you some merchandise, some cheese or something, yes, he knocks on your door, and then you will hesitate to buy from him. Okay, why is that? Why is it that your grocer nowadays, with credit cards, that's no longer the case, but it used to be that people had a card at the grocer and they say, write it down when you want to pay. Okay, instead of paying, I don't have enough money with me, write it down, I'll pay at the end of the month. Nowadays that doesn't go anymore, but it used to be. Now, the reason is that you go to the grocery again and again, okay? You go, it's a repeated game, it's a repeated transaction. And in a repeated transaction, you can trust, it's more liable to develop cooperation because if for example, if the grocery store writes down something that you owe them and then you don't pay, you're not going to get credit again, okay?
And vice versa.
And if he sells you rotten merchandise, you're not going to go there again, okay? So that's the insight that there's a punishment is going to be in the next game, yes, and that is what leads to cooperation. That insight is embodied in my work is made implicit. Now, in fact, people think, well, why do you cooperate with your grocery store? It's because you know them, you're a nice fellow, people wouldn't cheat you, and so on. That is true also, but the underlying reason that this friendship develops in the first place is because if you don't behave properly, then you'll suffer the consequences in subsequent periods. Okay, that is, sometimes I tell people this, and they say, for that they gave you a Nobel Prize. So I say, you know what, I agree with you, but when I was told about the Nobel Prize, I said, I'm not going to appeal. Okay.
But that's what's fascinating, that's the basics, the intellectual basics of capitalism, is exactly that. That's the trust between the company and the individual, or the two individuals, or the entrepreneur, the client, and that's what makes it possible. Without that concept, there wouldn't be a free market.
No, I disagree with you on that. I disagree with you on
Why?
that. I think you could have a free market also with one-time transactions. Trust is an important element maybe in capitalism, but it's not the basic element. You could have you could have lots of one-time transactions, and you see the merchandise in front of you, and in many cases the trust is important because the value of the merchandise is not apparent. Yeah, okay. You buy a machine of some kind, a telephone or a whatever, yes, a computer, and you do have to realize that that's a going affair. But you could have a free market in vegetables and fruits, where you can see the quality right away. I wouldn't say that that's on the basis of a free market. What lies at the basis of a free market is other work that I did in the early 60s, and I think this was also maybe recognized. It was recognized by the Nobel Committee. The connection between the law of supply and demand, that supply matches demand, and the prices are developed in accordance with the law of supply and demand. That is the very idea of a price that people charge going price for various items. Yes. The very idea of a price is a consequence of game theoretic ideas. Money, the existence of money is a consequence of game theoretic ideas, and it follows from the logic of exchange, among a lot of people. And you have to have a lot of people. You have to have a few people is not enough to engender competition. I just had I have a correspondence with somebody who's going to give a seminar in economics this week on Wednesday, and he said that the logic of competition doesn't work. Yes, he said that is in the automobile insurance market. And I said, well, how many insurers are there in the market in Israel? And he answered 4. I said, well, I asked him, 4 is maybe not enough to engender competition. You need a lot to get competition, but that's a different thing. I think it was mentioned also by the Nobel Committee. The Nobel Committee mentioned various things. There's one. Oh, what were you going to ask?
I wanted to go back to what Naor said, because I wonder if there is still something in free markets that has to do with what you mentioned as repeated games, and I don't understand it deeply, so maybe I'm making a mistake here. But there is something about the fact that even if I go to a vegetable stand, I make some level of assumption that he hasn't poisoned the tomatoes because of the fact that he wants to expect that more people will come to his business, and there's this repeated, maybe not between me and him, but between others.
Okay, fine. You if you would poison him, he would go to prison or something like that. Yeah, I think you're right.
A refill. Refill.
I think you're right. It's an important element, some side of trust. I wouldn't call it the basis of market economies. I think the basis of market economy is the other game theoretic idea that I was discussing. Yes,
price.
That competition. And you need a lot of people, so that I think so. But I think you're right. I agree with you that you do need that trust or near certainty that you're not being that you're getting merchandise, which is and after all, most of the merchandise we buy is not fruits and fresh fruits and vegetables. Yes, so I think that is an important element. I wouldn't call it the basis of yeah.
I read in an interview from a year ago that you said you have a breakthrough notion about chess.
Chess?
Yes, you were saying that you were working on an article about chess and that you have a theory. I was wondering if it's from...
I don't remember
okay.
that.
So what are you...
I don't remember that. I do. I have been working lately on something called the centipede game, which is, but it's a little too technical for this.
Complicated.
Yes,
but you are still devoted scholar. You still write articles and publish, and
I try to publish. I'll tell you the truth. I have had more rejections of articles in the last 17 years than in my whole previous life. Yes, in fact, I had more rejections in the 5 years following the Nobel Prize than in the whole.
Why do you think that
in
is?
the whole the bar simply went up after getting the bar goes up. I don't know why, or maybe maybe my ideas are not that good anymore. Yes. Huh? I don't know.
It's like no one's gonna.
No, thank you.
No thanks.
אבל לקחתי את הקפה, החזרתי את הקפה למטבח, אני חושב.
כן, כן, אתה ילד יותר מדי טוב.
כן, כן, כן. So that's interesting. That is it still hard to get rejected, or you're in the age that you don't give?
Yeah, no, I'm not in the age. No, I feel bad about getting a rejection. Or yes,
it still hurts.
It still hurts, absolutely. Yes.
Wow. But you don't give up.
I don't give up. No.
Wow.
Okay.
That's inspiring. Yeah. Whoop.
You set the bar too high too early.
No, it wasn't.
Maybe you should have held the research that you did for the Nobel Prize.
Not too early. Other people get Nobel Prize much younger than me. I was 75. 75. It's pretty old. It used to be pretty old. It's no longer pretty old. My own age right now is 92, which used to be considered very old. Yes, and I don't think it's considered very old anymore. Yes, it's considered old. Okay, but medicine has made tremendous advances in my lifetime. Okay, in my lifetime. It has made tremendous advances, and it's true that some of my contemporaries are dying, and I feel that even people younger than me who I knew quite well, they die. Yes, I just heard of a cousin who I knew quite well. He died last week. So people, I do feel it. I think most people still don't reach the age of 92.
Yes.
Most people, but quite a few do. Quite a few do.
I have to, in the last interview, 5 years ago exactly, you told us about the first time you implemented game theory when you were recruited by Bell Technologies, right, to solve a problem. Bell asked you to solve a problem with the squadron.
Right. Yes.
So the squadron, it's the Cold War era.
The squadron of aircraft. This was in the mid-50s. Yeah. And there were atomic weapons were there already. Yes, I mean they were used in '45, but there weren't a lot of them around, and so Bell was developing a ground-to-air missile, and the question was, if you have a squadron of aircraft, maybe 20 or so, most of which are carrying decoys. No, not carrying atomic bombs. And some, few, 3, 2, are carrying 4. Well, how do you program the missile to catch the right ones? What do you do? What can you do?
To raise the probability.
Yeah, what can you do to... well, you know, I thinking over this problem now, I don't see that you could do very much here, but you know, rather than shooting at random. But
If it's a repeated...
maybe I thought of something at the time. This was shortly after I had met Nash. Okay, so it was the year after. It was the year after I left graduate school. I think I did a postdoc at Princeton, a postdoctoral stint before I actually had a doctoral degree. So I got my doctoral degree in '55, and I left MIT in '54, and I think it was during that period that this arose. And I remembered the conversations with Nash, what you said is right. I wasn't especially captivated by game theory at the time, but I remembered the conversations with Nash, and I did something game theoretically.
That was the question.
I don't remember what I did,
Yeah.
but I did write a report, and then I got interested in game theory for its own sake. Yeah, that's...
Let's talk a bit about geopolitics before we wrap things up.
Yeah, okay.
So you talk a little bit in interviews about peace, war, how to prevent war, and I think the most pressing matter right now in the world is the war in Ukraine and Russia and Putin. Do you think it's a game between rational players, this war?
Yeah, I do think so, and I think what Putin is doing is terrible, and what's the spot? But I think the West bears some responsibility for this situation.
How so?
How so? You people are too young, but I remember the Cuban Missile Crisis very, very clearly, and it's very. It weighs heavily on my mind, although it was. It did not lead to the end of the world, but at the time, those few weeks of the Cuban Missile Crisis, 2 or 3 weeks, I thought that the world was going to end. Not in a year, not in a month, but tomorrow. Okay? The world is coming to an end. And I think the real hero of that story is Nikita Khrushchev. Okay? because he pulled out in time to now what was the reason for the Cuban Missile Crisis? It's because the Soviet Union was placing nuclear weapons in Cuba, which is 90 miles from Florida, okay? 150 kilometers, something like that. The Ukraine is 0 miles from Russia, okay? And the West was flirting with Ukraine, not with nuclear weapons. In fact, the West convinced the Ukraine to forego nuclear weapons, but many years ago, 20, 30 years ago.
Maybe that was a mistake.
Maybe that was a mistake. Well, maybe that was a mistake. It might have been worse if they hadn't. But the West was flirting with Ukraine. There was talk about having Ukraine join NATO and so on. And that was threatening to Russia. It's not 90 miles, it's 0 miles. It's, yes.
This is after this is after the West does have missile silos across other NATO countries.
Yeah.
Which are also close to Russia.
Okay. Well,
so I'm saying they were flirting with Ukraine in the context of already having missiles pointed at Russia, which are close. So maybe
yes, really? I didn't know that. I didn't know that they had missiles in which countries is that?
I mean, across NATO countries.
Yeah, which
like Romania,
Germany,
Poland,
Romania.
What?
Poland, Romania, countries. Yeah, Poland, Romania are the best examples, I think.
Poland.
I don't know if
Poland,
they're nuclear.
That there are missiles pointed at Russia in Poland.
They have missile silos in Poland. Poland being a NATO member.
Yeah.
They have US bases in Poland, for example. But you're saying Putin is...
I think...
it just goes to strengthen your point that I think them flirting with Ukraine made it even, struck home even more. The threat of Western incursion.
All right, I'm not defending Putin, but I think the West made a mistake there.
Mm-hmm. And in your interviews, you always say that weapons prevent war, right? Is it a right quote? You say weapons in the prospect of game theory, weapons prevent war. So I was thinking, yeah,
right. I say that, and weapons prevent war because weapons are there. My motto is weapons exist in order not to be used.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So if that's true, if I'm going with that rationale, and I'm looking at the whole Israel-Iran situation, so maybe in a pure game theory point of view, one might say that we're better off with a nuclear Iran because, assuming they are rational people, if there's nuclear Iran and nuclear Israel, there's less chance of war than if there's a non-nuclear Iran and nuclear Israel.
Well, I think if the Iranians are rational, okay, assuming that they're that's a big assumption, okay, assuming that they're rational, I think they fear an Israeli attack, then they're sure it's better for them to have the
nukes.
Those nuclear capability. I think the point I was making is that I think when two sides do have nuclear capability, as against two sides not having nuclear capability, okay, then the two sides having nuclear capability is a better situation, a better chance for peace between the two sides, okay? But I think we would not attack Iran. From my point of view, yes, we would not attack Iran. Iran does threaten to attack Israel, okay?
Mm-hmm.
We don't threaten to attack Iran, okay? So I think that situation is a little different. I think we can assume have nuclear weapons. I think we can. That's still not official, but let's assume that. Okay, then for us, it's not good that Iran has nuclear weapons because we don't threaten to attack them, but they do threaten to attack us with nuclear weapons, and the threat is quite credible because they can destroy Israel with one or two.
Yeah.
They can destroy. We can't destroy Iran with one or two weapons. Yes, we can destroy Tehran maybe, but not Iran. Okay.
But they do attack us by proxy, and we attack them maybe clandestinely and not officially, right? Not full scale bombing, but assassinations and Iran attacks by proxy through various. So but I do agree that maybe they talk a big game because they don't have a nuclear weapon, because they don't have to back it up. If you don't have the guns, then you might as well put on a big show and hope that scares.
I think they're very close, and they may have one already. I don't know.
You wouldn't put it past them to use it.
Well, I think one should take seriously what they're saying. I think one should take that seriously. I think their having nuclear weapons is not. I mean, we might do clandestine operations in Iran, but there's no way that we're going to attack Iran on a large scale.
Yeah, just because we feel like it.
Yeah.
We woke up angry and we feel like, yeah. Professor Aumann, it's been an honor. We really thank you for having us. We hope many of your studies and articles get published.
Okay.
It's their loss. Any rejection is their loss. And if they're smart, they'll publish the next one.
If they're rational.
They're a rational player. We wish you the best of health.
Thank you.
And Mazel Tov on the new great
granddaughter. I think I'm not going to have any more grandchildren.
It's not really up to you.
It's
no, great-grandchildren's not up to him. Grandchildren's up to him.
I think I'm finished with the grandchildren.
Okay. How many great-grandchildren you said you had?
37.
Wow.
Up to now, yes.
That's amazing.
And I don't know of any that's on the way, but probably there are some that are on the way. I don't know of any yet.
So your holidays are very big and
do you ever all get together, the entire clan?
It's so big now, the clan, that it's rarely that everybody gets together. For example, we played Hanukkah games on Motzei Shabbat two nights ago, and many of the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren were there, but not all.
Do you have to? You have to rent.
I have two granddaughters in the United States temporarily. One is married to an Israeli diplomat, and she lives near Washington. So he's working at the embassy. And her husband is doing a postdoc at Harvard. And she just gave birth to number 37. So I have two in America, and they weren't here, obviously, but there are also some of them in Israel didn't come. It's a large group, okay.
One last thing I have to ask you before we go. How do you bridge the gap between your faith and your faith in the Jewish belief in the Bible and evolution? How do you bridge that gap?
Well, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God had to have some way of creating the world, yes, and He created it using evolution. Okay, so even the Midrash says this explicitly, that the world, the things that were created in the world developed, and they use. I don't know whether I'm allowed to get up now, but I could bring the Midrash and I'll read it to you. Am I allowed to get up?
Yes.
Okay.
But just the headphones you need to...
My what?
The headphones.
The headphones. Okay. Okay, with the headphones.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. On the words "Vayichulu hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tzva'am," okay, so this is to that part of your audience that understands a little Hebrew.
Yeah.
And on those words "Vayichulu hashamayim va'aretz," which is right, it's just before it introduces the Shabbat, the seventh day. Okay. We say it on Shabbat, Vayichulu hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tzva'am, and so on. So the Midrash says, Rabbi Simon b'shem Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Mecholalim hayu ha'ma'asim v'hayu motchim v'holchim. The elements of the world were implicit in what God created, and they developed, and you mutchin b'olchin, yes, they developed, they evolved. Okay, so evolution is in the Midrash. Yeah. In other words, God did not create finished products. Okay, God created
The foundations.
God created the mechanism of evolution, okay?
Mm-hmm.
When you build a table, okay, you use wood, okay, and nails, and you use something, okay? God created the tool of evolution to have the world develop.
Which is, I mean, if, you subscribe to the belief that there's this almighty creator,
Yes.
and that he's capable of everything,
Yeah.
it would naturally make sense that he would create something far more complex. Meaning, instead of creating the table, he would create something that would become a table, right?
Yeah, right. Okay.
It's
Yeah,
much
that's it.
more
Yeah.
complex to do that than to just create the world
Yeah.
out of nothing.
Okay.
Professor Aumann, thank you so much for having us in your home. It was
Okay.
a real privilege, and best of luck with everything.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.